The hospital room was silent. It was 11:47 p.m. at Mercy General Hospital's intensive care unit. Richard Harlan, a successful corporate attorney, stood over his comatose wife's bed, his hand trembling about the ventilator switch. It was the moment he'd been dreading for weeks. Emily Harlan, the woman he'd promised to love in sickness and in health, lay motionless beneath sterile white sheets. But as the machines beeped their steady rhythm, Rick's fingers moved closer to the power button, his sister Claire standing behind him with cold encouragement. "It's time," Claire whispered. She wouldn't want to live like this. But what came next wasn't a peaceful goodbye. It was an awakening. Emily's eyelids fluttered, her lips parted behind the oxygen mask, and then, impossibly, after 8 months of silence, she whispered 3 words that would destroy them all. "I heard everything." But the biggest shock? What the neurologist revealed next. The world knew Rick Harlan as the devoted husband who never left his wife's side after the accident, the tragic figure who visited every day, who held her hand, who spoke to her unconscious form with tears in his eyes. Their love story had been the envy of their social circle, the ambitious attorney and the brilliant financial consultant who'd built a life of success and comfort together. But Rick wasn't old money or a man of inherited privilege. He had clawed his way up from a middle-class childhood, a fact that his sister Claire never let him forget. Claire had always been the golden child, their father's favorite, until everything changed when their father remarried and Emily entered their lives. Emily wasn't supposed to inherit the $4.2 million trust fund. That money was meant for Claire. But their father had seen something in Emily, her sharp mind, her genuine kindness, and changed his will 3 years before his death. Claire had smiled at the funeral, hugged Emily, and sworn they were family. But family, as Rick was about to discover, could be the most dangerous thing of all. 8 months earlier, Emily Harlan had never been happier. The anniversary dinner at Marseille had been perfect. Candles, champagne, Rick's hand warm over hers as he promised her another 20 years of adventures. She could still taste the creme brulee on her lips as she drove home through the rain-slicked streets, her auburn hair swept into an elegant twist, her emerald dress catching the streetlights. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, once, twice, 7 times in succession. Emily glanced down. Claire's name flashed across the screen, each message more urgent than the last. "Emergency, Dad's estate. Lawyers found something. Emily, answer your phone. This is serious. The trust fund. There's a problem. Call me now." Emily's sharp green eyes narrowed. She'd spent years as a financial consultant, had personally helped settle her stepfather's estate. There were no loose ends, no problems. Everything had been meticulously documented, every asset accounted for. So why was Claire? Her phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through the classical music on the radio. Emily reached for it, her attention splitting between the wet road ahead and the glowing screen. Claire never panicked. If she was calling this late, something must be genuinely wrong. The light ahead turned yellow. Emily pressed the accelerator, eyes flicking to the phone as she tried to swipe answer. She had maybe 3 seconds to make the intersection. The speedometer climbed. 45, 50, 55. Her finger found the screen. Claire's voice crackled through. "Emily, thank God, I've been trying to—" She never saw the truck. It ran the red light from the cross street, a massive delivery vehicle with failed brakes and a driver who'd been on the road for 16 hours. The impact was catastrophic. Metal screamed against metal. Glass exploded in a glittering spray. Emily's world became a chaos of sound and pain and spinning darkness. Then silence. When Rick arrived at the scene, his face was a mask of anguish. Paramedics were already pulling Emily from the crushed driver's side, her body limp, blood matting her auburn hair. He ran toward her, shoes slipping on the wet asphalt, Claire's earlier call still echoing in his mind. "Get to St. Catherine's intersection, now. There's been an accident." How had Claire known before he did? At Mercy General, Dr. Stephen Miles delivered his prognosis with clinical precision: severe traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. They'd induced a coma to let the swelling subside. The outcome was uncertain. Days, maybe weeks, before they'd know if Emily would ever wake up. Rick sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, while Claire stood beside him with her hand on his shoulder. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice soft with something that might have been sympathy or satisfaction. 3 months into Emily's coma, Rick Harlan stopped recognizing himself in the mirror. The man staring back had hollow eyes ringed with purple shadows, a jaw tight with exhaustion, and a wedding ring that felt heavier each day. He worked late at the law firm now, buried himself in depositions and contract negotiations, anything to avoid the suffocating quiet of the hospital room where his wife lay suspended between life and death. "Mr. Harlan, you need to eat something." Vanessa Chen appeared in his office doorway, blonde hair catching the fluorescent light, holding a cup of coffee and a sympathetic smile. She was 28, ambitious, efficient, the kind of paralegal who anticipated his needs before he voiced them. Over the past month, she'd become more than an employee. She'd become a lifeline. "Thanks, Vanessa." Rick accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing. He told himself it meant nothing. "Any changes?" she asked softly, settling into the chair across from his desk. "No, still the same." He didn't need to elaborate. Vanessa knew the routine: the daily calls from Mercy General, the flat updates from Dr. Miles, the unchanging tableau of machines and monitors keeping Emily tethered to a life she couldn't live. "You're allowed to feel tired, you know," Vanessa said. "You're allowed to want your life back." The words landed like absolution. Rick looked at her, really looked at her, and saw understanding instead of judgment. When had Emily last looked at him like that? Before the accident, certainly. Before the pressure of her stepfather's estate, the endless financial planning, the way she'd thrown herself into work as if proving something to Claire. Claire. At that moment, his sister was at the hospital, playing her role perfectly. She visited every day, sat beside Emily's bed, spoke to her unconscious form about childhood memories and family vacations. To the nurses, she was the devoted sister-in-law, the rock holding the family together. But when the door closed and she was alone, Claire's mask slipped. She pulled out Emily's medical chart, sharp eyes scanning the pages with cold calculation. Her phone came out, camera clicking softly as she photographed each update, each medication adjustment, each neurological assessment. She texted someone, a name that would mean nothing to anyone who saw it. "Gerald, need to talk, usual place." The chart went back into its holder. Claire returned to Emily's bedside, took her hand, and resumed her vigil. Back at the law firm, rain began to fall. It was a Thursday evening, the office empty except for Rick and Vanessa. She'd moved closer somehow, her hand on his arm, her voice soft with concern. "You don't have to carry this alone." Rick didn't remember who moved first. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was the moment their lips met, guilty, desperate, electric. What mattered was that for the first time in 3 months, he felt something other than grief. When they broke apart, Vanessa's lipstick was smudged and Rick's hands were shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But he wasn't. Not really. And that was the worst part. Dr. Stephen Miles had spent 30 years reading brainwaves, and something about Emily Harlan's EEG didn't add up. He stood in the neurological monitoring station at 6 a.m., coffee cooling in his hand, gray temples catching the fluorescent light as he studied the printout from overnight. The patterns were subtle, theta waves interspersed with brief alpha bursts, the kind of activity that suggested cognitive processing, not the flat, unresponsive readings typical of a vegetative state. He pulled up Emily's chart on the computer. According to the latest assessment, dated 3 days prior, the patient showed no signs of awareness, persistent vegetative state, poor prognosis for recovery. Dr. Miles frowned. He hadn't written that assessment. His meticulous habits kicked in, the same obsessive attention to detail that had made him one of the top neurologists on the East Coast. He scrolled through the chart history, cross-referencing timestamps with his own schedule. The entry had been made at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday. He'd been home that night, asleep, yet it bore his digital signature. "Nurse Patterson," he called, flagging down the charge nurse. "Who had access to Emily Harlan's chart Tuesday night?" "Let me check." She pulled up the access log. "Looks like Claire Harlan, the sister-in-law. She's listed as secondary medical proxy, and Gerald Marsh from administration was reviewing billing codes." Gerald Marsh. Dr. Miles knew him, a bureaucrat more concerned with hospital finances than patient care. Why would he be accessing a patient chart at midnight? "I want to run additional tests on Mrs. Harlan," Dr. Miles said. "Full neurological workup, cognitive response assessment, and I want them scheduled when I'm personally available." Over the next week, Dr. Miles became a shadow in Emily's room. He administered tests the chart said had already been done: pupil dilation, pain response, auditory stimulus. Emily's pupils constricted when he shone the light. Her heart rate elevated when he spoke her name. Her fingers twitched when he applied pressure to her nail beds. None of this was documented in her official file. Instead, the chart showed a steady decline: decreased brain activity, minimal response to stimuli, family considering end-of-life options. End-of-life options. Dr. Miles's blood ran cold. He began his own documentation, keeping detailed notes in a locked drawer at home. He photographed every EEG reading before it entered the system, noting how the official records differed from the raw data. Someone was systematically altering Emily Harlan's medical records to make her appear beyond recovery. But why? The answer came during afternoon rounds when he saw Claire Harlan emerge from Emily's room, phone in hand, a smile playing at her lips. She nearly collided with him in the hallway. "Oh, Dr. Miles," she said, smile widening. "I was just about to call you. Rick and I need to discuss Emily's care plan. Her quality of life, you know. We can't let her suffer like this forever." Dr. Miles watched her walk away, every instinct screaming danger. Someone was trying to kill Emily Harlan, and they were using his medical license to do it. The first thing Emily became aware of was the darkness. Not the peaceful darkness of sleep, but a suffocating void that pressed against her consciousness like deep water. She tried to open her eyes, to move, to breathe on her own, but her body refused every command. Panic surged through her mind, a scream building in her throat that had no voice, no escape. Then, gradually, sound pierced the darkness. Beeping, steady, rhythmic, mechanical. The hiss and click of a ventilator forcing air into her lungs. Footsteps on linoleum. Voices, muffled and distant, as if she were hearing them from underwater. "Stable for now, but there's been no improvement." That was a woman's voice. A nurse, maybe. Emily tried to call out, to signal that she could hear, that she was still here, still alive inside this tomb of flesh and bone. Nothing. Her lips wouldn't move. Her fingers wouldn't twitch. She was a prisoner in her own body. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time became meaningless in the darkness. But consciousness sharpened, bringing with it a new kind of torture, awareness without agency, thought without expression. Emily could hear everything. She heard Rick's voice, but not the tender tone she remembered. He sounded hollow, exhausted, angry. "I can't keep doing this, Claire. I can't keep pretending everything's going to be okay." Claire. Emily's mind latched on to the name. Her sister-in-law was here. Of course she was. Always playing the devoted family member, always so concerned. "You need to be patient," Claire said, her voice smooth. "These things take time." Emily wanted to scream. She could hear the lie in Claire's tone, the barely concealed satisfaction. The ventilator hissed. Emily's consciousness ebbed and flowed like a tide. Sometimes she caught fragments, Rick on the phone late at night, his voice soft with an intimacy that made her mental stomach turn. "I miss you too, Vanessa." No, she wouldn't understand. I know. Vanessa. His paralegal. Emily remembered her. Blonde, efficient, always hovering too close to Rick's desk. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. But it was Claire's conversation, whispered when she thought Emily was alone, that revealed the true horror. "Gerald, we need to make sure the records support our timeline. Yes, I know it's risky, but if we wait too long, Miles might notice. The trust fund transfers once she's declared brain dead, not before, just a few more weeks." Brain dead. Trust fund. The words assembled themselves into a nightmare Emily couldn't wake from. They were going to kill her. Claire was forging her medical records, manipulating Rick's grief, engineering her death to steal the inheritance. And Emily could do nothing but listen, trapped and screaming silently in the darkness. Then came the worst moment of all. Rick's voice, broken and resigned. "Claire's right. I can't do this anymore. Emily wouldn't want to live like this. It's time to let her go." No. But her body betrayed her, as silent as a grave. Claire chose a restaurant with soft lighting and expensive wine, the kind of place where difficult conversations happened among people who could afford them. "You look exhausted," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Rick's hand. "When was the last time you slept through the night?" Rick rubbed his eyes. 4 months into Emily's coma, he couldn't remember what rest felt like. "I don't know. June, maybe? This can't go on forever." Claire's voice was gentle, practiced. She slid a folder across the table. "I've been doing some research, studies on long-term coma patients, quality of life assessments, survival statistics." Rick opened the folder, his lawyer's eyes scanning the documents. Charts showing declining recovery rates after 6 months, articles about families bankrupted by ICU costs, testimonials from patients who wished they'd been allowed to die with dignity. The evidence was damning. What Rick didn't know was that Claire had spent 3 weeks curating these documents, cherry-picking data, even fabricating sources. The statistics were real enough to pass casual scrutiny, misleading enough to build her case. "The medical bills are approaching $500,000, Claire continued, her tone sympathetic. "Emily's trust fund could cover it, of course, but I'm not worried about money." "I know you're not." Claire's hand tightened on his. "But Emily would be. You know how she was about financial responsibility. She'd hate knowing you're depleting her inheritance to keep her body alive when her mind is gone." The words landed like she knew they would. Emily had always been meticulous about money, always planning, always protecting their future. Would she want this? Would she want to exist as a shell sustained by machines while Rick's life crumbled around her? "There's someone I want you to meet," said Claire. "Gerald Marsh, the hospital administrator. He's been reviewing Emily's case, and he has some insights that might help." The meeting happened 2 days later in Gerald's office. He was a soft man in an expensive suit, with thinning hair and the practiced empathy of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Mr. Harlan, I've reviewed your wife's records extensively," Gerald said, adjusting his glasses. "The neurological assessments show persistent vegetative state with minimal brain activity. Dr. Miles is optimistic, but frankly, he's emotionally invested. Sometimes doctors can't accept when it's time to let go." Rick's hands clenched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have options." Gerald's voice was carefully neutral. "Many patients in Emily's condition have advance directives expressing their wishes about artificial life support. Emily never made one." Claire cleared her throat. "Actually, Rick, I found something." She produced a document, yellowed paper, Emily's signature at the bottom. "Remember that conversation we all had after Dad's funeral about living wills? Emily filled one out. She said she never wanted to be kept alive by machines. Rick took the document, hands trembling. The signature looked right. The date was plausible, but something felt wrong, a lawyer's instinct prickling at the back of his mind. "Think about it," said Claire, softly. "Think about what Emily would want. Not what you want, but what she would choose." That night, lying in bed with Vanessa's perfume still on his skin, Rick stared at the ceiling and began to consider the unthinkable. Maybe it was time to let Emily go. Dr. Miles installed the camera at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, when the ICU was staffed by a skeleton crew and security was focused on the ER entrance. It was a small device, no bigger than a pen cap, positioned inside a fake smoke detector he'd purchased online. Legally questionable, ethically necessary. He'd spent 3 decades upholding the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Right now, that oath demanded he break a few rules. The first footage came through on his laptop the next morning. Emily Harlan, alone in her room, the ventilator maintaining its steady rhythm. Dr. Miles watched at double speed, looking for anything, any sign that his instincts were correct. Then, at the 43-minute mark, a nurse entered to check vitals. She spoke to Emily while adjusting the IV, standard practice, talking to comatose patients. That Emily's eyes moved. Not much, just a subtle shift tracking the nurse's movement from left to right. Dr. Miles rewound and watched again. The movement was unmistakable. Over the next week, he compiled evidence. Emily's fingers twitching when he asked her to squeeze, her pupils dilating in response to questions, one blink for yes, an absence of response for no, her EEG patterns showing increased activity during verbal stimulation, the kind of engagement that indicated awareness, comprehension. He documented everything in his private files, compared the raw data to the sanitized versions appearing in Emily's official chart. The discrepancies were damning. Someone was systematically erasing evidence of her improvement. On Friday afternoon, Dr. Miles cornered Gerald Marsh in the administrative wing. "We need to discuss Emily Harlan's records," he said, closing the office door behind him. Marsh looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his soft features. "What about them?" "The neurological assessments don't match my observations. Notes are appearing under my signature that I didn't write. Someone is falsifying medical records, Gerald, and I want to know why." The color drained from Marsh's face, then returned in a flush of anger. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Miles. It's a serious crime." Marsh stood, buttoning his suit jacket with shaking hands. "You're overstepping. The hospital's legal team has reviewed Mrs. Harlan's case. Everything is in order. If you continue making these baseless claims, I'll have no choice but to recommend your termination. Are we clear?" Dr. Miles held his ground. Perfectly clear. He left the office knowing the truth. This wasn't negligence or bureaucratic incompetence. This was conspiracy. This was attempted murder. That evening, Dr. Miles contacted Rebecca Morrison, a medical malpractice attorney he'd worked with on previous cases. He showed her everything: the videos, the EEG comparisons, the forged signatures. "This is attempted murder," she said, echoing his thoughts. "But we need more. We need to establish motive and connect the conspirators. Can you get me access to financial records?" "I can try." "And Dr. Miles, if they're willing to kill her, they won't hesitate to silence you. Watch your back." He drove home through rain-slicked streets, checking his rearview mirror more than usual. Emily Harlan was running out of time. The DNR papers had been drawn up. Claire was pressuring Rick to sign. Dr. Miles had maybe days to build an airtight case. Or Emily would die, and her killers would walk free. The DNR papers sat on the conference table like an executioner's warrant. Rick stared at them, pen trembling in his hand, while Claire stood beside him with her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The hospital's sterile fluorescent lighting made everything feel unreal, like a dream he couldn't wake from. "It's the right thing to do," Claire said softly, her voice a masterpiece of false sympathy. Emily wouldn't want to exist like this, you know that. Rick nodded mechanically. He'd been telling himself the same thing for weeks. 8 months of watching his wife breathe through a machine, 8 months of guilt and exhaustion and the suffocating weight of a life put on hold. Vanessa was waiting in the parking lot, ready to help him move forward, to build something new from the ashes of his marriage. She's already gone, Rick. You're just letting her body follow. The pen touched paper. His signature emerged in shaky letters. Richard M. Harlan. The date, Friday, November 3rd. Authorization to withhold resuscitation, to remove mechanical ventilation, to allow natural death. Natural, as if there was anything natural about this. Friday night, 11:45 p.m. Claire had arranged everything with meticulous precision. The security cameras would experience a convenient malfunction, a technical glitch Gerald Marsh had personally guaranteed. The duty nurse would be called away to handle a fake emergency in another wing. It would be just Rick and Claire and Emily, alone in that room with the machines and the impossible choice that had already been made. Rick didn't notice Dr. Stephen Miles standing in the shadowed alcove near the nurse's station, phone in hand, camera recording. He didn't see the doctor's jaw clench as Claire guided Rick toward the elevator, her voice too cheerful for someone arranging a death. He didn't see Dr. Miles immediately dial Rebecca Morrison, the attorney, his voice urgent. They're moving forward. Friday night. We need to be ready. Rick saw none of this. He only saw the exit where Vanessa waited and the promise of a life without the crushing weight of impossible decisions. He had no idea that the impossible was about to happen. The ICU was silent except for the mechanical breathing of the ventilator. In, out. In, out. A rhythm that had marked 8 months of Emily's existence. 11:47 p.m. Rick entered the room, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. Claire followed close behind, her presence a cold shadow. Through the darkness of her paralysis, Emily heard them. She'd been counting down to this moment since she'd overheard the plan, dreading it, fighting against it with a will that had no physical form. This was it. They were going to kill her. Rick approached the bed slowly, as if walking to a gallows. Emily could sense him, the familiar scent of his cologne, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. The man she'd loved, the man she'd married, coming to end her life for another woman and a clear conscience. "Move," Emily screamed inside her mind. "Move, damn you, move!" But her body remained a tomb, unresponsive as stone. "I'm sorry, Em," Rick whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't watch you suffer anymore." His hand reached for the ventilator. Emily could hear Claire's breathing quicken behind him, could sense the smiles spreading across her sister-in-law's face, the anticipation, the greed. "No, no, no, no!" Rick's fingers touched the power switch. Something inside Emily broke. Not physically, she couldn't feel her body enough for that, but something deeper, something primal. Every ounce of consciousness, every fragment of will, every desperate scream trapped inside her skull for 8 months converged into a single, impossible command. Move. Her eyelid fluttered, just once, barely perceptible in the dim light. Claire saw it first. Her smile faltered. Emily's vocal cords, strengthened by weeks of unconscious attempts to scream, to speak, to exist, vibrated. Air pushed through her partially open throat. Sound emerged, ragged and broken, but unmistakable. Rick's hand froze on the switch. His eyes widened, locked on Emily's face. Heard. The word came stronger now, clearer. Emily's lips moved behind the oxygen mask, her eyes opening, not much, just slits, but open, aware, conscious, accusing. Everything. The heart monitor exploded into chaos, beeping frantically as Emily's pulse spiked. Alarms began to sound. Rick stumbled backward, his face draining of all color, hand jerking away from the ventilator as if it had burned him. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Oh my God, Emily." Claire stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. Not of horror at Emily's awakening, but of horror at the catastrophic failure of her plan. Emily's eyes, those sharp green eyes that had once calculated complex financial portfolios, now fixed on her husband with an intensity that needed no words. But she had words now. She had a voice. "You," she whispered, each syllable a monumental effort. "You were going to kill me." The machine screamed, footsteps pounded down the hallway, and Rick collapsed into the chair beside her, hands covering his face, his entire world shattering into pieces he could never put back together. The door exploded inward with a crash that made Rick flinch. Dr. Stephen Miles strode through first, followed by 2 hospital security guards and a pair of police officers in dark blue uniforms. The cavalry had arrived 30 minutes too late, or perhaps exactly on time, depending on how one measured miracles. Rick stood frozen, his hand still extended toward the ventilator, his face a canvas of shock and guilt. Claire's head snapped toward the door, calculation flashing behind her eyes as she measured distances, exits, possibilities. She bolted. Security caught her before she made it 3 steps, hands gripping her arms as she thrashed and screamed, "Get off me! This is a mistake! I haven't done anything!" Dr. Miles ignored her, moving directly to Emily's bedside. His voice was gentle, professional, the tone of a man who'd spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. "Emily, if you can hear me, blink twice." Emily's eyelids, heavy, uncooperative, but hers again, closed and opened. Once, twice. The room erupted. One officer pulled out handcuffs while the other began reading rights. "Richard Harlan, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." "No," Rick whispered, but the word had no power. He sank into the chair, head in his hands. "No, no, no." Claire's screams intensified. "This is insane! We were trying to help her! She's brain dead! The records show—" "The records you forged," Dr. Miles said coldly, producing a tablet. He pulled up footage, Claire photographing medical charts, Gerald Marsh accessing files at midnight, text messages about timelines and trust funds, along with Gerald Marsh, who's being arrested as we speak. The second officer approached Claire. "Claire Harlan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, and forgery." Emily watched through half-closed eyes as her sister-in-law was dragged toward the door, still screaming about misunderstandings and lawyers. Rick sat motionless, broken, as the officer cuffed his wrists with mechanical efficiency. Then Emily moved. It took every ounce of strength she possessed, strength built from 8 months of screaming silently in darkness, from weeks of fighting paralysis, from a will that refused to be erased. Her right arm lifted, trembling, fingers extending. She pointed directly at Claire. "Her," Emily rasped, her voice growing stronger. "She planned everything." Claire's face contorted with rage. "You bitch! That money was supposed to be mine!" And there it was, the confession, the truth, spoken in fury. 6 months later, Emily sat in a wheelchair in the downtown courthouse, her auburn hair shorter now, her green eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable. The judge had just read the verdict. Rick, 15 years for attempted murder. Claire, 25 years for conspiracy, fraud, and orchestrating the plot. Gerald Marsh, 10 years as an accessory. "Mrs. Harlan," the judge said, "would you like to make a victim impact statement?" Emily gripped the wheelchair's armrests and rose slowly to her feet. The courtroom gasped. With a physical therapist standing ready beside her, she stood and spoke clearly, every word a testament to survival. "They tried to erase me, to silence me, to steal not just my money, but my voice, my life, my future." She looked directly at Rick, who couldn't meet her eyes. "But I heard everything, and I'm still here." The divorce papers were signed that afternoon. Emily reclaimed her inheritance and established the Emily Harlan Foundation for Locked-In Syndrome Awareness. Dr. Miles received the National Medical Ethics Award. 3 months later, in a sunlit physical therapy room, Emily took her first unassisted steps, 5 of them, shaky but defiant, while Dr. Miles watched with tears in his eyes. Each step was a victory. Each step was revenge against those who'd tried to silence her forever. Each step was hers.